Alright, we're going to, I think, review some trig first because I think on some of the right triangles like 30, 60, 90, 45, 45, 90, y'all need a little bit of review. So this is from Pre-Cal, and I'm going to just review the ratios real quick, and then I'll give you some stuff to do. Your two triangles are 45, 45, 90, and then you have 30, 60, 90. And the ratios for those, if you have your 45, 45, 90 triangle, your two sides that are opposite your 45-degree angle are the same. So let's just say the ratio would be 1. Your hypotenuse is square root of 2 times those two sides. So your ratio is 1, 1, square root of 2. On a 30, 60, 90, your smallest side is your side opposite of your 30, which is 1. Your side opposite of your 60 is square root of 3 times your smallest side. So the side opposite of 60 is square root of 3. And your hypotenuse is twice as big as your shortest side, which is 2. So your ratio is 1, square root of 3, and 2. So let's just say you had to find the sine of 30 degrees. We're not going to really draw the triangle right now, but you could use your ratios. Sine is opposite over hypotenuse. So your side opposite of 30 is your 1. Your hypotenuse is your 2. So your sine of 30 degrees is 1 over 2. And we'll draw triangles in just a second. Okay, so that brings me to reference angles. Let's say you had to find the sine of 210 degrees. You would want to draw that. It would be in your third quadrant. And let me back up for just a second and say something. Let me give you a sentence. And your sentence is, all students take calculus. And if you start in your first quadrant, that is where your all is. And what that means is, in your first quadrant, if that's where your triangle ends up, sine, cosine, tangent, cosecant, secant, and cotangent, all of your trig functions are positive. Students goes in your second quadrant. This is sine and its reciprocal, which is sine and cosecant. So in the second quadrant, all of your sine and cosecants are positive. Everything else would be negative. So at least this way you don't have to pay attention to directions when you do draw your triangle. In your third quadrant, you have T. All students take calculus. So that means your tangent and its reciprocal are the only two trig functions that are positive. And then all students take calculus. In your fourth quadrant, you have your C, which is cosine and its reciprocal are the only two trig functions that are positive. And I'll give you an example of that. If we draw 210, remember 210 is right here, but to find your reference angle, you take the difference between 180 and 210, which would be 30 degrees, and you would draw your triangle. So the side opposite of 30 is 1, which in this case it'll be -1 if you pay attention to your direction, but I'll show you something in just a second. Your hypotenuse is twice as big as your smallest side, and your side opposite of 60 would be negative square root of 3. Now, this is what I was saying. All students take. Now, you're finding the sine of 210 degrees, which ends up in the third quadrant. But in the third quadrant, your only two trig functions that are positive are tangent and cotangent, because all students take. So you know your answer is going to be negative. So you don't have to worry about your directions as far as labeling your side. But that's just something, if you want to use it, you can. If you don't want to, you don't have to worry about it. So sine is opposite over hypotenuse. So the sine of 210 degrees would be -1/2. Let's say that you had to find the cosine of 330 degrees. So you would draw it, which would end up right there. And your reference angle would be 30 degrees. So you would label your sides, which would be 1, 2, square root of 3. And you can do your direction, that would be negative. But all students take calculus. This ends up being in the fourth quadrant, which means cosine is positive in the fourth quadrant, so you don't have to worry about your signs. And cosine is adjacent, which is square root of 3, over hypotenuse, and your cosine of 330 is square root of 3 over 2. I just think it would be helpful for y'all to know this stuff, because even though when you do take a college class, your professor is either going to make you memorize the unit circle, or, if you don't memorize the unit circle, this is one way to find it out. Now, it is a long way, but let's just say that you had to find the tangent of 45 degrees. Well, if you could just draw a normal triangle and label your sides, so that would be square root of 2, 1, and 1. Whatever angle that you look at, it does not matter. So tangent would be opposite over adjacent, so that would be 1 over 1, so your tangent is 1. Now, if you look at your unit circle, and let's say you had to find the sine of 45 and the cosine of 45, that is opposite over hypotenuse, which is 1 over square root of 2. So if you'll look at your unit circle, the sine of 45 degrees is square root of 2 over 2. If you'll look at your unit circle for the cosine, it is also square root of 2 over 2. Well, if your cosine is x and your sine is your y and your tangent is sine or y over cosine over x, it would be 1, which is the same thing we got from drawing the triangle. So you can do it however you want to, but that is if you do have to memorize the unit circle and you don't remember, that is a way to do it. So let's just say that, let me find one. Oh, let me review something. Let's review, sorry about this, radians to degrees. If you wanted to change 2 pi over 3 to degrees, the paper is not cooperating, sorry. Okay, let's say you wanted to change 2 pi over 3 to degrees. Now remember, if you're changing it to degrees, you don't want any radians, so what you would want to do is your radians to cancel, or your pi. So that's how you remember to multiply by 180 over pi, if y'all remember that from pre-cal. Your pi's cancel, and you end up having 360 over 3, which ends up being 120 degrees. Okay, now let's say that you're doing degrees to radians. Then we'll just do the same degree. Let's do 120. Change it to radians, which means you want your pi on top. So we're going to multiply by pi over 180. You can punch in your calculator 120 over 180 and don't get a mixed number. You can get an improper fraction. But your zeros cancel. You have 12 pi over 18, which reduces to 2 pi over 3. So let's say that you had to find all trig functions, so sine, cosine, tangent, and if we find cosecant, secant, and cotangent, and we'll let our value be 11 pi over 6. So I'm going to change that to degrees, and I'm going to multiply by 180 over pi. 6 will go into there. I don't have my calculator right out with me. So that would be 30. Maybe 330 degrees, hopefully, if I did my math right. So you're going to draw that. 330 degrees is right there. Find your reference angle, which your reference angle would be 30. Set up your ratios, which is -1, square root of 3, and 2. Now, all students take calculus. The only ones that are going to be positive right here are cosine and secant. So you could actually go ahead and put negatives on everything else, and then find the sine. Your sine is opposite over, no, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's right. Opposite over hypotenuse, so it'd be -1/2. which means your cosecant is -2. Your cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, which is square root of 3 over 2. And your secant is 2 over square root of 3, which you can kick it up, 2 square root of 3 over 3. Your tangent is opposite over adjacent, which is -1 over square root of 3, negative square root of 3 over 3. And your cotangent, you can take the reciprocal of that, and then you won't have to use the kick method again. Flip that, and you just get negative square root of 3. So I'm going to have an assignment for you to do tomorrow. What I need for you to do is finish those worksheets that you started working on yesterday. Those of you that didn't finish, and some of you didn't work real hard. But and then I'll give you a paper out of the pre-cal book, and you can practice on this, and then you can have it and turn it in.